Did you know Mad Max Fury Road was almost an animated film? Or that vials of sperm were almost a central plot point? Those are just a couple of the many twists the movie went through before it became the high-octane R-rated spectacle we know today. From decades of delays to casting changes and scrap TV shows, the path to Fury Road was anything but smooth. Let's dive into how this iconic film could have been completely different. The idea for Mad Max Fury Road stretches all the way back to 1987. It seemed like a straightforward plan to Australian filmmaker George Miller, but this movie took a long, bumpy road before finally hitting the big screen over 20 years later. At first, everything seemed set for a smooth start in 1998. George Miller got the idea for Mad Max while he was simply crossing a street in Los Angeles. He imagined a world where violent fights weren't about oil or goods, but about human beings. This concept grew further during a flight from Los Angeles to Australia, where he continued to envision marauders battling over people, not possessions. To bring this vision to life, Miller decided to first visualize the entire movie in physical form. He worked with about 5 storyboard artists to create about 3,500 panels, nearly matching the number of shots in the final film. His goal was to create a film that was almost a non-stop chase, relying heavily on action-packed visuals rather than dialogue. For the screenplay, Miller collaborated with Nico Lathoris and Brendan McCarthy, a renowned British comic creator. McCarthy wasn't just a writer, though. He also designed many of the film's new characters and their outrageous vehicles that we'd see in the final film. But the early 2000s were anything but smooth sailing. After the September 11th attacks, the world was in a lot of chaos. These attacks caused a big dip in the value of the US dollar, especially compared to the Australian dollar. This shift meant that the budget for the film suddenly got a lot bigger. It was like everything suddenly cost more. On top of this, the Iraq War and some major issues with Mel Gibson, who was supposed to come back as Max, stirred up even more trouble. And by 2006, George Miller, the brains behind Mad Max, had to make some tough calls. He realized that Mel, busy with his own movies and a bit too aged for the action-packed role, just wasn't the right fit anymore for the wild world of Mad Max. If Gibson had stayed, we would have seen an older Max, possibly changing the entire tone of the film. It might have been more of a story about an aging warrior rather than the high-energy, fast-paced Max we see today. At that time, George Miller even considered casting Sigourney Weaver as the female co-lead, a role that would evolve into the fierce character of Imperator Furiosa. This idea actually sprang up after Gibson himself suggested Weaver, having worked together previously. Miller liked the suggestion and the pieces started falling into place. In 2007, Miller made it clear Mad Max would ride again, but this time with a fresh face. The vision for the franchise by then was almost expanding beyond traditional films. By March 2009, Miller announced an ambitious new project, an R-rated animated feature inspired by Japanese anime but tailored for Western audiences. The animated version was set to borrow heavily from the Fury Road storyline, but without Gibson's involvement, not even as a voice actor. But the project was scrapped because George Miller decided to focus on making his live-action film, which he believed would have a broader appeal and a better chance at the box office. Apart from that, Miller was also diving into the gaming world. He teamed up with Cory Barlog, the genius behind God of War 2, to create a video game based on Mad Max. They were planning something big that would bring the dusty, chaotic world of Mad Max to gamers by around 2011 or 2012. And all these plans were being cooked up at Dr. D Studios, a digital art studio that Miller started with Doug Mitchell in 2008. Finally, after many subsequent delays, the game was released on the 1st of September 2015 for PlayStation 4, Windows, and Xbox One. Now, rewind back to 2007 and Miller's attention was still in the desert of Mad Max after his much lighter animated film Happy Feet. His unfaltering interest pushed the project back into the limelight. Miller was ready to announce that filming would kick off in early 2011, but guess what? More delays hit, and filming didn't start until mid-2012. They wrapped up at the end of the year, but had to shoot some extra shots all the way into 2013. And then on May 18, 2009, the buzz around Mad Max Fury Road was that location scouting had kicked off, signaling the film might hit production that year. George Miller, the driving force behind the Mad Max saga, chose to go for a live-action film despite previous plans. He had even prepped by having all the wild dystopian vehicles ready, which had been built years before an earlier attempt that never took off. By 2010, the project had switched from Fox to Warner Bros., and Miller was setting the stage for an epic comeback. He planned to start shooting in Broken Hill, New South Wales in August 2010, but Tom Hardy was not Max's only choice. Charlize Theron was also announced for a major role. The race for Max was tight between Tom Hardy, Armie Hammer, and Jeremy Renner as the finalists. Others considered at different points included Michael Fassbender, Joel Kinnaman, Heath Ledger, Eric Bana, even Eminem, but Eminem did not want to film outside of the United States. By June 2010, Tom Hardy confirmed on Friday Night with Jonathan Ross that he was chosen to become the new Mad Max. Now, even though the single project of Fury Road alone was proving to be a monumental task, Miller originally planned to film 2 Mad Max movies at once. That is insane. Anyways, in July 2010, George Miller announced big plans. They would shoot 2 Mad Max films at once. Mad Max Fury Road and Mad Max Furiosa. They brought on Weta Digital, known for their amazing special effects, aiming for a 2012 release. But nature had other plans, and they hit a major roadblock. Heavy rains unexpectedly turned the dry area around Broken Hill into a field of wildflowers. Well, as you can guess, this was too pretty and not the rough, empty look they needed for Mad Max. Because of this, they couldn't start filming in November 2010 as planned. They had to move the entire operation back to Namibia a year later. The team also looked at other empty, desolate places, like the Atacama Desert in Chile, Chotel Chirije in Tunisia, and Azerbaijan, trying to find the right setting. If they had filmed in any of these alternate locations, the film's visual tone and setting could have been entirely different from the film we see today. Now, the cars and trucks in Mad Max Fury Road are a huge part of the movie's identity. Production designer Colin Gibson built 150 vehicles, but only 88 survived the intense action scenes. Most were made to be destroyed, to be fair, and if they hadn't focused so much on making these vehicles real and fully functional, the action would have definitely felt less intense and gritty. The raw, patched-together look of the cars helped tell the story of survival in a broken world, and without that, the movie might have lost some of its deeper meaning. George Miller didn't want to outdo the earlier Mad Max films with bigger and flashier vehicles. Instead, he wanted to capture the same feeling but show how the world had changed in the last 30 years. Colin Gibson had even created a backstory to explain why the vehicles looked the way they did, and did so with all the hot rods used. Some of the vehicles were built as early as 2003 and made to actually function. These weren't just props, they had character. The most famous vehicle, the War Rig, was a mix of parts from several different cars. A Tatra 815 truck, a Chevrolet Fleetmaster, and even a Volkswagen Beetle. And had these vehicles been designed differently or were just CGI or less detailed, the film's action scenes wouldn't have felt as real or impactful. The movie could have lost some of its unique look and emotional depth. But how did Fury Road go from a PG-13 movie to one of the most intense R-rated films ever? Well, at first, George Miller was supposed to make Mad Max Fury Road with a PG-13 rating. Warner Bros. Tested 2 versions, one made by the studio and another by Miller. When they saw that Miller's version got a better response, they decided to go with the R-rated version, which allowed the film to keep its intense action without being toned down. Miller also wanted to film the movie in 3D from the start, but that idea was scrapped. The special 3D cameras were too expensive and might not have survived the tough desert conditions and big stunts. Instead, they shot the movie in 2D and converted it into 3D later. A PG-13 rating or 3D cameras could have made the final movie very different. The R rating gave the film its raw, intense feel, and filming without 3D cameras made the stunts and action scenes possible. But back in 1995, a Mad Max TV show was announced. Did you know that? And it actually quickly became the center of excitement for many fans. And a whole lot of people wondered why it never came to be and if its cancellation somehow led to the delayed release of Mad Max Fury Road in 2015. Former Warner Bros. TV executive Greg Mayday was passionate about the idea of a Mad Max TV show and brought in Eric Blakeney, the showrunner of 21 Jump Street, to work alongside George Miller. The two hit it off and things seemed promising. But the excitement didn't last long once they got into the details. While Miller was willing to tone down the explicit violence for television, it wasn't the violence that caused issues. The network felt that the Mad Max films and the ideas Miller and Blakeney were working on were simply too intense for primetime TV. In one memorable screening of Mad Max 2: The Road Warrior, network censors admitted they didn't have any specific notes but told Miller, "You've just got to take the intensity out of it." This feedback crushed the project. Miller couldn't bring himself to water down the essence of Mad Max, and Blakeney believed that Miller was never fully invested in the TV idea anyway. Had the TV show gone forward, it's possible we wouldn't have seen Fury Road in its current form, or it might have taken even longer to come to life. Before Mad Max Fury Road became the movie we know today, Brendan McCarthy, a comic book creator, pitched a bold idea for Mad Max 4. His version centered around vials of sperm as the main plot driver. I know, a concept so intense and strange that it was considered too wild for both TV and film. Despite the over-the-top nature of McCarthy's pitch, it grabbed George Miller's attention and got him thinking. McCarthy's ideas may have been too much for a television audience, but they had a lasting impact on Miller. Instead of pursuing a TV show, Miller decided to work on a movie sequel. Some of McCarthy's concepts, though toned down, found their way into Fury Road, shaping the characters, themes, and world we see in the 2015 film. And that's it, everyone. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe for more behind-the-scenes movie content. Stay tuned for more exciting insights and untold stories, and we'll see you in the next one.